we have a sound check?
How about now?
Okay, I see a bull.
Yes, okay. That was weird. I wonder why that wasn't working. But it's working now. Thank you for letting me know that it wasn't working early rather than going later. Because here I was talking away and assuming that everything was fine. And the danger. That's something that never happens in person. If you move your mouth around and no words come out, you immediately know that you have no sound. All right, well, that certainly gave enough time for people to log in. So let's go ahead and get down to our Torah portion for today, which is Parashat Pinchas. Parashat Pinchas ostensibly begins with a follow-up to the end of Parashat Balak and of Pinchas being elevated to the status of also being a Kohen. Very famously, only the children born to Aaron's sons after the appointment to Kohanim actually were Kohanim, were priests, because it says Aaron and his sons will be priests, which meant his grandchildren, such as Pinchas, who had been born before that appointment, were not actually Kohanim. However, Pinchas gets a special one-off elevation due to his defense of the nation in the end of last week's Torah portion, and he becomes a Kohen. However, Parashat Pinchas, despite being named for Pinchas, is not as famous for that as it is for the sacrifices, the korbanot. This is a section where if you go to any synagogue in the world and you scroll to chapters 28 and 29, you will find that section of the Torah is the most worn out section of the Torah. This is where you're going to see the cloth, the scroll, sulfur and more maybe just a little colored at the edges from being used and rolled so much at this portion. And that's because we read this section a lot, and we're going to talk about why we do that in the commentaries. But I want to give you a sample of the section that we read. We're not going to read through all of chapter 28 and 29 because it is quite lengthy. But I want to give you an example taken from the end of the selections, which should be quite representative of what the other parts sound like. And we will be going slightly faster than usual because, as you'll see, once we get going, there is a certain pattern evolving. And that should make it quite clear, and additional explanation won't be needed. So let's go ahead and pick up chapter 29, verse 12, near the end of the list of sacrifices in the book of Pinchas. And we are starting with the 15th day of the 7th month. Now, 15th day of 7th month, if you are doing your quick calendar check and remembering that the 7th month is the 7th month since Pesach, since the holiday of Passover, since the month of Nisan, that means we are in the month of Tishrei. And the 15th day of the 7th month is going to be that full moon day of Sukkot. So we are talking about the holiday of Sukkot at this point on verse 12. On the 15th day of the 7th month, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall observe a festival of Adonai. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai, 13 bulls of the herd, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs, they shall be without blemish. The meal offering with them, of choice flour with mixed oil in, shall be 3/10 of a measure for each of the 13 bulls, 2/10 for each of the 2 rams, and 1/10 for each of the 14 lambs. Just so we have an understanding here, there is the basic offering of each of the animals that are being listed, and then there is a meal offering, a grain offering that goes along with each of the animals, mixed together with oil as we see. And we can see for each of the bulls, they're getting 3/10 of the measure that goes with the bull. And for each of the rams, they get 2/10 of a measure. And for each of the lambs, they get 1/10. So there is a 3-to-1 scaling for the animals being offered and the grain that's being sacrificed with them. And then one more animal, and there shall be one goat for a sin offering. The Se'irizim is known as a chatat offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering and libation. So meaning, of course, we have the regular daily stuff too. And that is day number 1 of Sukkot. Day number 2 is going to look almost identical, but pay attention. Second day, 12 bulls of the herd. There's our change. We go from 13 to 12. 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offering and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libations. Third day, 11 bulls, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. If you're having trouble keeping track of the numbers, don't worry. We're going to have a chart that will summarize it in a minute. Fourth day, 10 bulls, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. Fifth day, remember there are only 7, so don't worry, we're almost done. 9 bulls, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. Sixth day, 8 bulls, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libations. Seventh day, 7 bulls, 2 rams, 14 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bulls, rams, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. On the 8th day, you shall hold a solemn gathering. Whoa, we changed. 8th day is this solemn gathering, which is a tricky word to work on, which is the phrase Atzeret. And this is where we have the holiday of Shmini Atzeret. You shall not work at your occupations. So day 1 of Sukkot, we are not working. And day 8/Shmini Atzeret, which is technically its own holiday, is also a day of no work. But we have to get back to the list. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai, 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 yearling lambs without blemish, the meal offerings and libations for the bull, ram, and lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offerings, its meal offering, and libation. Please notice that as we switch to Shmini Atzeret, and then we get to the sacrifices for Shmini Atzeret, it is going back to the same formula we had at the beginning of Sukkot. As I mentioned, Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret are technically separate holidays, even though Shmini Atzeret can feel like day number 8 of Sukkot. And that can be seen by both the language here, introducing the sacrifices as a new section, a paragraph break, if you will, in the way the terminology is set out. And of course, by the fact that we have reset the numbers. We are 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 yearling lambs without blemish. That is a completely different calculation than what we had for Sukkot and each of its days. So Shmini Atzeret really does stand apart from Sukkot, and not because, as we see again, the quantities being given for the mincha offerings, the meal offerings are the same style as we saw with the Sukkot offerings. And let's get down to the end of the parasha. Come on, there we are. All of these you shall offer to Adonai at the stated times, moadechem, at your fixed seasons, at your fixed times. There's lots of different ways to render that. In addition to your votive and free will offerings, be they burnt offerings, meal offerings, libations, or offerings of well-being. These are the voluntary type offerings, or the offerings that are done as parts of vows. And this is trying to remind us at the end of chapter 29, when we have just finished 2 solid chapters talking about different calendar sacrifices, that these are in addition to the offerings that are made on a voluntary basis due to our own vows or personal wish. And then it lists some of the types of voluntary or votive vowing type offerings. Burnt offerings, meal offerings, libations, or offerings of well-being. And then chapter 30, again, like I've said now for a few weeks running, is technically part of Parashat Pinchas, even though it's a new chapter in the numbering system that was given to us by non-Jews. So Moses spoke to the Israelites just as Adonai had commanded Moses, which is, in my mind, really quite obviously the end of chapter 29. It is trying to say that indeed God gave this information to us, gave this information to Moses, and Moses indeed conveyed this information to us. It is a bookend. And that makes even more sense if, and let's see if Safaria works easily for me here. Sometimes jumping around can be tricky. If we go, oh, no, I said 28. Is 28 going to load? Hello? Let's go to 29 and flip up and then go to 28. See, like I said, sometimes Safari's table of contents doesn't always work. There we are. So if we go back to the beginning of chapter 28, where we see the beginning of all of the sacrifices being listed, we see, as usual, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, command the Israelite people and say to them, be punctilious in presenting to me at stated times the offerings of food due to me as offerings by fire of pleasing odor to me. Say to them, these are the offerings, and then we get a list. And I'll talk about what parts we didn't read out loud together, but then we get that list. Clearly, the first line of chapter, no, I said chapter 30. I know I'm not making a good advertisement for Safaria right now, but trust me, it works generally much better than this. But clearly, chapter 30, the first line is saying, Moses did exactly what God had commanded him to do, meaning he conveyed all of this information to the people of Israel. All right. There was a lot of information there, and I am willing to guess that for many of you, you felt a little either overwhelmed, if I want to put it positively, or perhaps a little bored by that list of sacrifices. I know that many people find on the occasions where we read from this list that they are not emotionally, spiritually, historically moved by what's going on here. And I would like to sort of work on that a little bit here. I want to sort of help you understand what's being done, that there is a pattern embedded in the text that can be understood, and that pattern is insightful and useful for things other than knowing how many offerings were being made. So before we jump into our commentary to explore some of these different options, any questions or comments on the sacrifices so far? All right, so let's take a look at our commentary. So first of all, we're going to get the very solid reminder taken from Rambam's Mishnah Torah. On every festival, and likewise on Yom Kippur, and on all the 7 days of Pesach, 2 scrolls of the law are taken out of the ark. In the first, the sections we have named are read. In the second, the sections in the book of Numbers referring to the sacrifice for the day, the whole section that we were talking about, is read. The reader of the last reads also from the prophets, meaning the Haftarah. So Rambam lays out what hopefully you know from your experiences in congregational life, that whenever it is a holiday or of any type, and we're going to talk about some of the categories of holiday in a second here, we take 2 Torahs out of the ark. The first contains the text that is particular to that event itself, to that holiday. And the second Torah will be already pre-rolled to the section of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, that we are talking about today, the section of chapters 28 and 29. And it's from there that we will read about the sacrifices attached to the day. Now, there are a couple of things to bear in mind for all of this. One, you might be asking yourself, well, why do we need two Torahs? Surely the section of the book of Numbers and whatever section pertains to the holiday that we're reading about are all in the same Torah, because all Torahs are a copy of the same Torah, and that is absolutely right. But our ancestors actually had kindness, compassion, and understanding of community life, and they considered it to be a tircha, a burden for the community, to force them to have to wait while the shliach tzibur, while the leader or organizer of the service would roll from wherever the holiday reading was to the sacrifice reading here in the book of Numbers. So having two scrolls is kind of mandated by not wasting or the community's time or making them suffer. If we really do want the community to enjoy their time at services, and things that can be done to make that easier are done. If you only have one Torah, then yes, of course, you can wait and roll, and that's perfectly fine. But really, ideally, you should have at least two. And for the few times during the year, three Torahs are sort of the minimum for a smoothly running service. Okay, but let's take a look at our chart, because you can take the entire section between chapter 28 and the end of chapter 29, and like I said, also with verse 30, if you want to use that as your and then he did it bookend, and note that there is a very logical breakdown to all of the sacrifices that are being discussed. Verses 1 to 8 talk about what is described as the daily tamid. This is the daytime offering. Not the daytime, that's the wrong way of putting it in English. The day-to-day offering. Every day, we offer this set offering called the tamid offering, because it's always, and it consists of these two lambs plus the other things that go along with it. But we're going to focus only on the animals, not the grains or libations that or oil that also go along. So we get two lambs on a daily basis. English, verses 9 through 10 focus on the weekly musaf for Shabbat, and then verses 11 to 15 talk about the monthly musaf for Rosh Chodesh. Now, musaf is not just part of our service that we have in the prayer setting. Musaf really means additional, and it comes originally from the idea of there being an additional sacrifice on behalf of Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh, meaning in addition to the regular daily sacrifice, you get a upgrade, additional sacrifice to commemorate the special nature of the day, the special day too. So Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, the monthly cycle, we get these extra offerings. Now, if you look, we're seeing the very simple pattern here, daily, weekly, monthly. The Torah is walking us through from the most frequent to the less frequent sacrifices that are needed. If you look over on the right-hand side at the number of animals that are offered for all of these days, you will notice, however, that there is a marked difference between the Shabbat offering and the Rosh Chodesh offering. That Shabbat offering, like the daily offering, has two lambs, but the Rosh Chodesh offering, we get two bulls, a ram, 7 lambs, and the goat, that Seir Zim Chatat, that goat for a sin offering. There is a big jump in the significance of the sacrifices that are being offered for Rosh Chodesh. Now, part of that is because, well, Rosh Chodesh is less frequent. Shabbat is every week. Rosh Chodesh is only 12 times a year, give or take leap years. And so, of course, it's simply more plausible to have the larger sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh than it is for the other times. But Rosh Chodesh is also marking the transition between these daily and weekly occurrences, the sort of constant emotional connection to God to a more sharp and pointed connection to God that is going to happen on a less frequent basis. Rosh Chodesh being the most frequent of it, but then transitioning in verse 16 to Chag HaMatzot, to the holiday of Pesach. And then we get the Musaf for Shavuot, the Musaf for Yom Teruah, also known as Rosh Hashanah, and the Musaf for Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. Now, when you look at the Chag for the Chag offering for Passover and the Chag offering for Shavuot, you'll note that it matches the 2171 pattern as we see with Rosh Chodesh. But when we get to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we get the 1171 pattern. So the number of bulls has been diminished when we get to our holidays of Tishrei, the holidays of the month of major celebration. Now that's telling us a couple of interesting things. One, that we should consider the holiday of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as being very similar. That's why they have the identical sacrificial pattern for this type of sacrifice. But also that the Chagim, Pesach and Shavuot, do have a slightly elevated status in some significant ways. And indeed, the status of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, as incredible as they are, is a little different with regards to sacrifices than the pattern of sacrifices would be for Passover and Shavuot. But now we get to the great wrinkle, which is what we read together in our text, which is Sukkot. Now, Sukkot is also a Chag, like Passover and Shavuot, but Sukkot is also a holiday in the month of Tishrei. So what happens? We get 13 bulls on the first day, and then a diminishing number of bulls for each of the 7 days until we get down to 7 bulls on the final day. We get 2 rams, 14 lambs, and again, that singular chatat offering, that sin offering for the goat. If you are quick on your math, you'll notice that the 13 that are being offered here is in fact combining the 1 that would come from being a holiday in Tishrei and the 2 that comes from being a Chag, plus 10 because Sukkot is this moment of great gratitude for the material abundance that God has given us. It is the harvest holiday par excellence. And then diminishing it down each day, of course, allows each of the successive days to be slightly less special than that first day of the Chag, which of course always has the biggest crown. Likewise, we can see that the number of rams is a combination of 1 from the holidays in Tishrei, 1 from being a Chag. Likewise, the number of lambs, we see 7 that we would get from a holiday of Tishrei and 7 from the holidays that are Chagim, combining to make 14. The chatat offering, the sin offering, is just singular, and so it only gets 1. And then to wrap it up and show again the holidays of Tishrei all being the same, Shmini Atzeret, that 8th day of Sukkot, but really its own holiday, receives the 1171. That is the same as we see for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So already just by taking the time to look at the pattern here, we can see so much that is being taught to us that often when we just hear the numbers go rolling past in our readings, we lose sight of this sort of pattern. Of course, we are finding out that there is a daily, weekly, and monthly, and then yearly type activities where we have a chance to connect to God through the korbanot, through the sacrifices. That is incredibly important to recognize these multiple opportunities. We can also see that each of the holidays is being given a certain category, a style of sacrifice, which allows us to tap into a certain recurring spirit or feeling towards that particular type of offering, that particular type of day. Again, between the Chagim and the days of Tishrei, of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shmini Atzeret. And obviously the standout of Sukkot demands our greater attention, that this is meant to be a particularly celebratory holiday, And Sukkot is called Zman Simchatenu, the time of our rejoicing. So it is not surprising that this would be the time when the most abundant sacrifices are made as a celebration of the great abundance that we would be enjoying. But that is sort of the tip of the iceberg, but just an indication of what we can begin to understand simply by taking the time to look at this seriously, rather than looking at it as something that just keep flipping pages until the narration starts up again. Now, before we get into some of the commentary on this, now that we've got the basics down, any questions or comments of your own? All right, let's get what I can on the page. First, from Sifra, Midrash Halacha, a little bit of insight of just why is the text written the way it's written? Well, I might think that sacrifices are permitted to be brought on the festival, but are not mandatory. It is therefore written, meaning of the sacrifices, from our final verse in Numbers 29, these you shall offer to the Lord in your appointed times. That is to say, if to permit, they have already been permitted. That means this verse can't be coming just to tell us to permit. If so, why is the latter stated? Why have chapter 29, verse 39? To make them mandatory, that all of them must be brought on the festival. So having this bookend at the end is not an extraneous afterthought. It is not just bring the sacrifices, of course. It is telling us that we must bring the sacrifices, that these are indeed a commandment, not that if you make a sacrifice, this is what you should do. It is saying, when you make a sacrifice, for you shall make that sacrifice, do it according to the way that has been listed in chapters 28 and 29. Again, Sifra, like all of Midrash Halacha, is there to give us a blow-by-blow understanding of why the Torah chose certain phrases and certain places and what it was trying to teach us. It may seem obvious, and if so, then Sifra did its job because it means that Jewish tradition has made it obvious since then, but it's not obvious without sharing this type of study from time to time. I don't think, no, there's no way to get all of this on to one page. But we're going to read from Tanhuma. This is actually from very early on in Tanhuma. And it is beginning with the phrase in the translation of, may it please our master. And this is something that shows up from time to time in the Midrash collection known as Tanhuma, where an opening is being given for a teaching to come from the primary author. And oftentimes the questions are very open-ended. And as we can see, in this case, it's going to give us a wide set of understanding. May it please our master to teach us the benediction, the blessing one should offer upon the erection of a new home. You built a new home? What blessing do you say at that moment? Thus did our masters of blessed memory teach us. Here is our answer. Upon the erection of a new home, a man should recite the blessing. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has kept us in life and has preserved us and enabled us to reach this time, better known as the Shehechianu, a blessing that we use for many, many occasions where we are joyful to be at that moment. He must recite this prayer in order to please his creator. What he means by this is that when you have had the blessing of being able to build a house, to have a roof over your head that is yours, then you must give thanks to God for having made that moment possible. It is very easy to get caught up in the belief that we are solely responsible for all of our own accomplishments. But of course, that arrogance is completely false. We are all beholden to God as well as to each other for all of our successes. And that means having a blessing where we thank God for allowing us to reach this moment is entirely appropriate and indeed mandatory. But we'll see that that is not the end of this teaching. Building off this idea, you find that the festivals, the Chagim, were granted to the Israelites for their pleasure. The holidays were not made just so we could make sacrifices because God wanted sacrifices for God's self, The holidays were made for us. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, delight yourself therein, meaning on the holidays, so that you may repeat them in the year to come. As it is said, and you shall keep this ordinance in its time from year to year. Again, the idea that every calendar cycle we would be marking the different occasions with these holidays. That is to say, you should repeat them yearly. Therefore, no one may say, just as an individual blesses the Holy One, blessed be he, so does the Holy One bless him. This cycle means that every year we are given a chance to say thank you to God for allowing us to reach these moments of joy. And of course, what do we say when we say that thank you? We say the Shehechianu, the same blessing. Just as we say that blessing when building a house, so too do we say that blessing when celebrating a festival day, because we recognize that this was something that God built so that we would be able to have the joy of that day. Rav Chanina declared, we learned this as well from another verse, this idea about the holidays being for us. These you shall offer to the Lord in your appointed times. There's our Numbers 29:39 verse. It does not say you have offered, past tense, but rather you shall offer, future tense, thereby indicating that you should continue to make your offerings at the appointed seasons in the years to come. Hence it follows that the man who completes the erection of a new home or purchases new vessels must recite a blessing upon that occasion. That it is not merely once that we have this occasion, we say it, but indeed anytime there is a new home or new items of special significance for you or your family, in particular new clothes have always been special. Before you wear it, before you move in, we say the Shehechianu. And this is not just moving from nothing to something. This is moving for every new thing. Just as every holiday comes around is also a special treasure to be enjoyed, so too every new home or new item that is of significance is a thing to be enjoyed and reflected upon with a blessing to God. So by following this pattern of the sacrifices, by seeing in that calendar these gifts that God has allocated to us throughout the year, and by knowing from that we should be grateful to God and give thanks for reaching each of those moments, we reinforce the idea that so too for other significant moments in our life, we must express gratitude and joy through the Shechianu, but it's, of course, importantly, not just through the words, but in our heart. Questions or comments? All right, so can I get all of this? Oh, yes, I can. Look at that. Vayikra Rabbah. Rabbi Mane of Shav and Rabbi Yoshua of Shichin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, great is peace, for all blessings and goodnesses and mercies that the Holy One, Blessed One gives to Israel are sealed with peace. Now, sealed, the term chatima is both a technical as well as a general metaphor. To be sealed, we're talking here about like sealing a letter. If you have the memory of the old days where you'd have a piece of paper and you'd write on it and fold it, and then you'd put wax and a stamp, a seal onto the letter. That's what we're talking about here. But the technical terms in Jewish practice is there is always something that wraps up, that finishes either a section of prayer or other types of activities. And what they are drawing our attention to is that all of those will wrap up and finish with shalom, with peace. What is the proof of this? Well, the blessings included with the reading of the Shema, we finish with spreads the shelter of peace, the finish of what we call the Hashkivenu. The standing prayer, also known as the Amidah, we finishes with who makes peace, or say shalom, or sim shalom, shalom rav, or sim shalom. And the priestly blessing finishes with and grant you peace. Again and again and again, we can see that when we have these types of blessings, the last one in the list is going to be a prayer for shalom. And I only know this regarding blessings. Okay, you made your point regarding blessings. So where do we derive this for sacrifices? How do we know that God also has this pattern of finishing with peace even when it comes to sacrifices. This is the Torah of the burnt offering, of the grain offering, and of the sin offering, and of the guilt offering, and of the fulfillment offerings, and of the peace offering. The summary phrase in Leviticus 7:37, of course, finishes with the peace offering. So we can see that when God is talking about the sacrifices, he finishes with that phrase. Just a reminder that the term Torah here is the more literal meaning of instruction for each of these different types. Well, says the incredulous student, I only know this in general because of the summary phrase. So where do we derive this in detail? How do we know that it's not just in a summation that peace comes last? How do we know that even in the details, peace comes last? Well, again, if we go back and break down each of the sections that Leviticus 7 is summarizing, we see each of the sections is laid out as follows. This is the Torah of the burnt offering. This is the Torah of the grain offering. This is the Torah of the sin offering. This is the Torah of the guilt offering. This is the Torah of the peace offering. Between chapter 6 and chapter 7, we can see that as each of them are laid out in the Torah for instruction, that the last one to be laid out is the peace offering. I only know this for individual sacrifices, if an individual is bringing a sacrifice for their own particular needs. So where do we derive this for communal sacrifices? How do we know this works for all of us when there is a sacrifice that is done on behalf of the community, not on the individual? The verse, our verse 29:39 says, do these for Adonai on your set times, but finishes with your peace offerings. Meaning at the very end, and that one's a little confusing without looking at it, it talks about the doing all of those sacrifices up through 38. And then in addition to reminding us that we should offer these at their set times, these mandatory sacrifices for the holidays and days, it then goes on to list other types of offerings. And of course, what is the last one? The Shalmechem. This is our peace offerings. Here, JPS is translating it as offerings of well-being, but the more classic term is peace offering. And at any rate, it, of course, is built around the root that is shalom. And just to make sure that we understand just how important peace is as being the ultimate seal, the ultimate summation of everything, I only know this in this world. From where do we derive this in the next? Meaning olam hazeh, this world, this time. How do we know about olam haba, the world to come? From Isaiah 66, I will extend to her peace like a wadi. The rabbi said, great is peace, for when the Messianic king will come, he will only open with peace. As it is written, how pleasant on the mountains are the feet of the messengers proclaiming peace. So peace is the ultimate expression, the ultimate form, and as such always has this place at the end as a summation for anything that God is trying to describe as a source of blessing. Questions or comments on Vayikra Rabbah's insight here?
Quick question. He's discussing the pattern of the sacrifices. Is it any coincidence this mirrors the Amidah?
No, it's not a coincidence at all. The Amidah, of course, as it was formally created, was created after the sacrificial services had been established, and it was only natural to finish the Amidah as well as the blessings that accompany the Shema with the concept of Shalom. So yes, it's definitely integrated. Now Ramban wants us to understand that these section about sacrifices is not just here to teach us about God's preference for peace and emphasis on peace. It's not here to just teach us about the communal obligations, but this is still something that is meant to teach us individually, to reach and touch all of us. And reminder, this is Ramban, also known as Nachmanides. This is not the same guy as Rambam, the author of the first text. The verse here comes to say that although this section deals with the laws of offerings, God did not single out Aaron and his sons in connection with it, as in the sections of Leviticus. In the book of Leviticus, where it talks about sacrifices, Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim, are really the focal point. Instead, here, Moses said it to all the children of Israel together, according to all that the Eternal commanded Moses. From the beginning piece that we read till the end, we can see that it is aimed at the entire community, even though it is only dealing with sacrifices that seem to only affect the Kohanim, because they even went so far to include the laws of refraining from work on the festivals and the daily whole offerings and the additional offerings and vow offerings and the free will offerings. For thus it was told to Moses, command the children of Israel, back in verse 2. So what he's trying to make sure we understand is that addition in 29:39 of listing the other types of sacrifices that are brought only by individuals, as well as the inclusion of the laws regarding not working on the Chagim, were there to make sure that we, the average Joe Schmo Jewish person, didn't think of these sacrifices as being the isolated domain just of the Kohanim, of the priests. These sacrifices are there for all of us, both literally, that they are offered on behalf of all of us, but also spiritually, psychologically, socially, however you wish to conceptualize it. We are intimately connected with the sacrifices too. They are about us. They aren't about the priestly class. And the reason is because this commandment applies after they enter the land, and it is a commandment to all Israel to observe the daily whole offerings and the additional Musaf offerings in their appointed times, and to bring their vow offerings and free will offerings. It's not just Aaron and his sons' job to do these things. This is going to be the requirement of the entire nation. Yes, they are the ones who will officiate, but making sure they take place and taking part in them, whether it be through the helping with the payment or actually attending while it's being done, is something that is upon all of our shoulders. Furthermore, the main intention of the commandment is that these days should be remembered and kept, as we see as an echo from Esther 9, and to refrain on them from all servile work, and therefore it was told to all the children of Israel. So Ramban is making sure we understand that these sacrificial laws are not something there as just an obscure note for Aaron and his sons to know how many cows to have ready, but is meant to be a reminder to all of us that all of the Torah and all of its rituals are there for our benefit, to lift us up individually, spiritually, psychologically, in every way possible through our participation in, as well as our meditation and study of. Questions or comments? Thanks to the chart. We do have a little bit more on page 3 because I couldn't squeeze all the text in that I wanted and still have the chart be readable. All right. So again, we have this notion of the Sifra, trying to read carefully, this time though taken from the book of Leviticus. Speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel and say to them, this is the thing that the Lord has commanded, saying, why was it written this way? This teaches us that the children of Israel are commanded not to slaughter and bring an offering outside the temple court, but not Gentiles. And what is more, a Gentile is permitted to build a bama, a temporary altar, in all places, and to offer sacrifices to heaven. Judaism is not a big fan of idolatry, as I'm sure you're all aware, but we absolutely are okay with a non-Jewish person making an offering to God, that's capital G God, and doing so in a way that would even be prohibited to us. And that's why Leviticus is being so clear, says Sifra, that Aaron and Aaron's sons and the children of Israel, we are limited in doing our sacrifices purely in the way the Torah describes, which means only at the temple and only according to all of the commandments that we've been discussing. But a non-Jew is allowed to worship God in the way that they see fit, even in ways that would not be permitted to us. For example, outside the temple area and having built their own bama, their own temporary altar. and that is okay. This information about sacrifices, both the particular as well as the general concepts that the Torah gives us, should be available for people to learn of all types. Judaism is not particularistic in the sense that we don't believe everybody should be Jewish, but it is universalistic in the sense that we believe everyone can learn from the truth that is given to us in the Torah. So make of this what you will, but understand that if you're not Jewish, you do have options of connecting to God while still learning from the wisdom that the Torah has to offer. And finally, can I get that to stop bumping up and down so I can just get it on one screen and not have to, there we are. And finally, we read a little bit more about this whole notion of the holidays and sacrifices in the first place. The word atzeret, that final sacrifice that the final day of sacrifices that we talked about, which could be read as assembly, it can also be read as day of restraint, teaches us about a matter of great benefit. The desire for temporal possessions, for having stuff, is powerful, and the work to acquire them is very heavy. The more time a person devotes to them, the less time he has for spiritual acquirement. If you are constantly engaged in trying to get enough money to make your house payment and your car payment and your insurance payment, although that's not really a possession kind of thing, but unfortunately it is often a monetary demand, then how much time will you have left for your spiritual endeavors? The Torah's aim is to free people from this useless enslavement and to exchange it for the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. Now, obviously, we cannot give up all of our work in order to just be spiritually enlightened. Judaism does not believe in isolated monastic, self-impoverished living, but it does believe in a proper balance between the work we do to put food on the table and the work we do to put the spirit in our heart. Thus, the Torah gave us appointed times of meeting with God, meaning the festivals, which provide a spiritual arousal that will distance us from excessive dealings with material possessions. So this calendar of holidays, as we see throughout the chapters 28 and 29, are not just there so that we can make a sacrifice, but they are there to help lighten our material burden and our attachment to the material world. Instead, we will occupy ourselves with them on the holidays only as needed for God's commandments and acquiring the eternal world to come, of linking ourselves to this future day of redemption. These days make a tremendous impression on us, so that all our further dealings in the material world during the weekdays will be for the true purpose. By having been reminded and strengthened of what is actually important in life, when we head out into the regular weekdays, whether it be after Shabbat or after any of the holidays, we will have a clearer view of what it is we should be doing and how we should be living. That is why they are called a holy assembly as well, a preparation and invitation to holiness. To this end, so that we will remain attached to the holy concepts we attain during the festival after it is past, the last day of Pesach and Sukkot is called Atzeret, this final holiday day, a holiday of restraint, of retention. This means a day in which we will exert ourselves with all our strength to keep the precious lessons we became accustomed to during the days of the festival. So we will not abandon them after the holiday passes. So because we get this lengthier period, these 7 days of special intensity for Pesach and Sukkot, at the end of them, that final day of celebration has a special flavor of really trying to galvanize and to permanently embed into us the spirit of the holiday, so that when we leave that moment of intensity, we are properly focused and prepared for the mundane life, which can still be illuminated with that sanctity and spirit. Questions or comments before we finish then for today? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. And please continue your reading with the Torah at your own pace. And make sure that when you get to parts that maybe don't captivate your imagination quite so much, that you still pay close attention to it, read the commentaries, and try to find some insights that will be of use. Take care and be well.
Thank you.